Next session about safeguarding online identity in the age of AI and ChatGPT. Please join me welcoming the speaker, Aidan McCarthy, founder and CEO of Verified.
Perfect. Thanks so much. How's everyone doing today? Awesome. All right, so as mentioned, my name's Aidan McCarty. I'm the founder, CEO at Verified Inc. And I want to talk to you today about bringing human identity online to fight against the rise of AI, ChatGPT, and a lot of new fraud vectors that are coming out along those lines. And the argument I'm going to make to you guys today is that we should not be using AI to fight AI. Instead, we should be using other technologies, other methods, and I'll talk about that. So the evolution of identity over time has looked something like this. So we started out pre-internet using all sorts of analog technologies, and primarily this was human identity. You would go to your banker at your local bank branch, they would see your face, they would hear your voice, and they know that that's actually you. This is a kind of identity that has proof of identity, right? You use your face, your voice, your license, and so on, and it's reusable. You can do it infinitely. You can go to your insurance company, you can go to a hotel, you can go rent a car, whatever the case might be. The next step here, when we move online, you have to ask the question, how do you bring that same sense of fidelity? How do you verify that individual in an online context? Of course, this started with usernames and passwords, has become increasingly sophisticated over time, where we now have eKYC, we do doc scanning, liveness checks, all this kind of fancy stuff. This is very cool, but it's not reusable, right? You don't have that same sense of human identity where you just walk into the bank branch and you know exactly who this person is. That's what you ultimately need to do to fight against AI. So the next evolution of identity online is not only doing these kind of fancy verification schemes, but also making it reusable across organizations to build up trust and reputation over time. So the challenge of online identity, in brief, looks something like this. There's a very famous cartoon of this in the New Yorker where on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. Why is this the case? It's the case because of shared secrets. Now, this is something that, as I'll mention in a moment, FIDO's really done a good job moving away from. But I mean shared secrets in actually a broader sense. Of course, it's OTPs and it's passwords and things that we're familiar with. But I actually would extend that to things like knowledge-based authentication, cloud-resolved biometrics, and so on, where anytime you're presenting information that, in theory, only you should know, you are you online. That is the base paradigm that we're working with. This is a huge problem, of course, because as you can see in this graph down below, this is a graph of data breaches over the last 2 decades, and both in terms of number of breaches and in terms of records that are exposed. So when you have this many records exposed, it becomes a pretty damning paradigm to say that if you present secret information, you're you online. This probably looks quite familiar to you. This is the other result of that, which is that all of these organizations that we interact with, from social media to rideshare apps to banks to insurance companies and so on, all independently collect, verify, maintain that personal information, which leads to an extremely fragmented and broad attack landscape. FIDO, of course, helps enormously with one specific component of this, namely authentication. So once you've validated that this is the correct individual to open an account and you open an account on their behalf, now when that user comes back, you can say this is that same person over and over again, or at least a pretty close approximation to that. The key thing, though, is while it's replaced shared secrets in the standard sense of passwords and OTPs and things like this, it does not replace shared secrets in the broader sense that I mean, of using biometric information and so on for that initial account creation, that initial binding. So you know it's the same person, but you don't actually know who it is. So there's lots of solutions to try to address this core problem today, namely identity proofing kinds of solutions. So there's dozens and dozens of providers that do this kind of thing, where you collect information from the user, you enrich that information, you call a bunch of databases, you do some fancy AI in the background to validate that this is actually Aidan, or this is actually whoever it claims to be. You can then use that verification to provide services to the user, like banking or insurance or what have you. These have become pretty sophisticated solutions, right? So they're calling tons of databases, they're doing AI match scoring, liveness checks, document verification, and they're very geographically specialized. They use different kinds of data sources in different geographies. This is all cool, but fundamentally, it's flawed. And it's flawed because of a structural dynamic. This is not something where you can just keep getting better and better, doing the same sorts of stuff that they're doing today, and solve the problem at large scale for perpetuity. And the core challenge here, the analogy I like to use, is if you had to go fight Mike Tyson in boxing, would you go ahead and say, okay, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to train. I'm going to get really good at boxing so I can go fight Mike Tyson. Of course you wouldn't say that, right? That's a really bad approach. That's the equivalent of using AI to fight AI. It's simply not a scalable approach. So what you need to do instead is change the paradigm. You can't simply be relying on those sorts of methodologies to fight against the new coming waves of synthetic identity fraud and other AI-based attack vectors. There's, of course, other limitations with this as well. So it's not actually just about the fraud associated with AI. It's also that these kinds of solutions, these identity proofing solutions, are geographically limited, they're single use, and they're slow, which leads to 40% abandonment even in best-in-class implementations like with Robinhood, Chime, and other sorts of fintech solutions. So this is an extremely big problem for all kinds of online services. So how can you do this better? Now, I mentioned, of course, that a huge part of the problem is user experience. The other part is, of course, fraud. So synthetic identity fraud right now is an $8 billion annual problem. It's the fastest growing attack vector, where essentially you're bringing in real information and fake information at the same time to create synthetic identities. This is only becoming easier and easier as attackers start to use AI to do so. So you can use ChatGPT and a lot of these tools to do this, to create synthetic identities that you can use to open bank accounts, get loans, and then defraud those banks. It's even becoming worse than that. You see here on the bottom left, this is a famous YouTuber named Johnny Harris. He did a video about AIs and deepfakes. And this is him actually on the left, and then him using off-the-shelf AI to mimic his videographer on the right. You can see just how convincing that looks. This is somebody not with deep technical expertise, just using off-the-shelf technology to do this. So it's starting to be extremely easy to create these fraudulent identities. So how can you use the same kind of technologies on the other side? There's another example I like to use, which is ChatGPT, of course, has been used by many students to cheat on exams and homework and things like this. OpenAI, many of you may have seen, tried to come out with their own algorithm to see, is this actually a human on the other side, or is this ChatGPT? And it was so bad that they deprecated it earlier this year. So it's really not so simple to create AI algorithms to detect, is this a person or is this AI? This, of course, also leads into social engineering attacks and things like this that I think have been touched on in other presentations here. So happy to get into that Q&A if you want. So what is the solution to this? The solution is not to get really good at boxing, right? Not to use AI to try to fight these sort of attack vectors, but rather to completely change the game, to completely change how you're trying to compete. And how you do this is creating a reusable identity. So if you can bind identity information back to an individual over time from many different data sources, you can build up trust and reputation and truly bring human identity to the web. That same experience I mentioned of walking into your local bank branch and they just know it's you. That's the experience you want to bring online. This is a huge opportunity. McKinsey's looked at it. Liminal, digital identity research firm, has looked at it. It's like you see these huge numbers, right? 3 to 13% of global GDP, $270 billion by 2027. Why is this the case? It's the case because identity is fundamental to every interaction that we have online with any online service, and because it's going to become required in the age of AI. This is no longer going to be an option for the foreseeable future. Now there's precedent for this. So reusable has changed other industries before. A great example of this is credit. So we draw very heavily at Verified Inc., where I work, from the history of Visa. So the history of Visa comes out of the 50s, where most Americans had a dozen or more forms of credit. These are independent lines of credit, right, with Gimbals, Bloomingdale's, Mobil Gas, and so on. This is an extremely laborious process, both for the user to get that line of credit and for the company to extend it. In 1958, Bank of America introduced Bank AmeriCard to solve this exact problem. Bank AmeriCard was direct mailed to 70,000 people in Fresno, California, where Bank of America had 50% of the merchant banking business. That's how they got the flywheel churning. And it unlocked instant access to credit at any of these retailers all at once. You'll note that this is exactly the same dynamic to what I just talked about earlier and what we have today, where we have dozens of companies, really hundreds of companies online that we interact with, where they independently collect, verify, and maintain my information to try to validate that I'm Aiden and then do it over and over again as I authenticate back to them. This is crying out for a Bank Americard for identity, general purpose ID card that unlocks access at all of these services, human identity online. So what does this mythical good human identity online look like that I've been talking about? Well, there's obviously been a whole lot of research done on it, as I've pointed out here in the previous slides. McKinsey says the following 4 things represent a good reusable digital identity. It's verified to a high degree of assurance, it's unique, has individual consent, and protects privacy. We add at Verify that it has to be network-driven, include incentives for all of the members, and make it really easy to access and share and easy to integrate. Why do we add these things, and why does this all add up together? What you need to be able to do is not only make a really strong bind back to an individual so you can present that information over and over again, but you also have to make it extremely easy and incent people to provide information into the ecosystem and use this kind of solution. In doing so, you build up a reputation bound back to individuals over time that's secure, user permissioned, private, and so on. That's what you need to do to build a truly resilient digital identity system across industries that can fight against all of these new fraud vectors that are popping up. What does this amount to? It amounts to bringing human identity online. So hopefully you can grasp that core message here of really what we're trying to do is just replicate what we have in everyday experiences of just knowing that this is the correct person because you've seen them before, right? You can reference their picture, you can reference their license in person. You want to make that same experience seamlessly online. There's dramatic improvements in doing this. So when you have a reusable identity versus a current identity solution, which you can see at the bottom there, it's future-proof against AI, it's user permissioned, you reduce fraud, but most importantly, it's dramatically better from a user experience standpoint. This is what the core of the business value immediately is and why companies are adopting this very quickly instead of just waiting for the fraud to get so bad that they have to. So you take something that's 16 clicks, 5 minutes, and make it a 1-click, 5-second process, dramatically reduce abandonment rates, and you get way more people through the door. What's the value of this? It's approximately what the decrease, the delta in the drop-offs is, times the lifetime value of the user. For someone like a fintech or a financial institution, that's a really big number. That's why this is so compelling. So what's the path forward here? The path forward has been charted to some degree by other organizations and other geographies. So BankID, I know they're here at the conference, had a great conversation with them. Aadhaar in India is another example of this. These are either government-sponsored identity solutions or let's say government-condoned solutions in the case of BankID and other things like that. These are really great solutions to look at and to draw from. But the real future here is reusable identity networks. It's not just having, say, a consortium of banks. It's not just having a government-sponsored identity initiative like Aadhaar in India. The best way to do this is Visa for identity. It's by aligning incentives across a network of organizations that can provide data, accept data, all user permissioned, bound back to an individual. And when you do that, you truly create human identity online, experiences where you just arrive at a property and get instant access, fully secure, fully private, which drives enormous increases in commerce and really seamless user experiences. So thanks so much for your time today, and happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thanks for great presentation, Aiden. We don't have a question submitted online just yet, so maybe we can open it up to the floor. Show me your hands, and I'll pass you the mic. Okay. Anyone? Okay. I guess maybe Aiden, you can share your closing thoughts.
Yeah, I would encourage all of you, if you have not thought about reusable identity, you have not thought about how to create this bind back to an individual, not just authentication, right, once you've already created that account, but creating the account in the first place, that's the next frontier of where all of this is headed. So we'd love to chat with any of you after about how to do that for your organizations or think about including that as part of your roadmap. Thanks so much.